I don't understand why you insist on brawling with these third-rate hooligans. And you call yourself Batman.
The Suicide Squad is one I was pretty unsure about going in. I didn't like the first attempt at Suicide Squad, and it wasn't really a team I had much reverence for. James Gunn was tagged to direct, which also gave me mixed feelings. I loved the first Guardians, but Guardians 2 was pretty meh for me, honestly. He wrote some good movies, but none of my favorites, and he worked with Troma a lot in his early career, which is a company that has a bit of a one-trick pony track record as much as I have fun with those films. I didn't know if the studio would interfere with his vision as well. And the film had a real ragtag cast that I was pretty mixed on, like John Cena, who I feared might come off a bit generic. Thankfully, I was delightfully surprised with this film, and I was very impressed with a lot of these performances on first watch, John Cena being a highlight of the film, but that's not to downplay everyone else in the cast. It was fun when it needed to be, funny, and also serious when it needed to be. It felt like a really well-written comic about these goofy characters. I really enjoyed my first viewing of this film. The film had a fairly messy history, however, before it came to screen, much like a lot of the films discussed in this. It started as a totally different project with a different creative team. Originally, this film was set to be directed by David Ayer, with Will Smith returning, after they finished the Netflix movie Bright, which they worked on together in 2017 following Suicide Squad. Eventually, David Ayer transitioned to working on Gotham City Sirens, a film that would ultimately be cancelled. We'll come back to that eventually. So, Warner Brothers started looking elsewhere for a new director to helm the sequel, looking at names like Mel Gibson and David S. Goyer. Warner Bros. Would amass numerous scripts and rotate through names along with the stars, getting caught up in other projects. For example, Will Smith was working on the Aladdin remake and Gemini Man, and Margot Robbie was working on Birds of Prey. This version of the film was set to see the return of Deathstroke, who would fight Deadshot and the rest of the squad. Meanwhile, at the competition, James Gunn started getting a lot of heat for controversial jokes he made on X, or Twitter back in the day, based around pedophilia, bestiality, AIDS, the Holocaust, and 9/11. Marvel ended up releasing him from his upcoming Guardians of the Galaxy 3 film because of the tweets. Warner Bros. Was interested in hiring Gunn after he was released from his contract, initially courting him for Superman, but Gunn was hoping to tackle the Suicide Squad instead. David Ayer was supportive of the decision to have Gunn direct the project and was quoted as saying James Gunn was the right choice to helm the film. Shortly after signing on, Marvel decided to reinstate Gunn as the director of Guardians of the Galaxy, and James Gunn agreed, assuming he'd be able to finish the Suicide Squad film first. James Gunn said this was the most fun he ever had making a film and felt on a creative high while doing it. Warner, for its part, gave very little notes on the film while he worked on it, and Gunn came in under budget. After the success of the film and relative ease of production, James Gunn would be promoted to the head of DC and would announce his upcoming roster of DC films for the upcoming reboot, the DCEU. This includes Gunn finally taking up WB's request of him making a new Superman film in Superman Legacy, or since I started writing this part, Superman. The Authority, a team originated for Wildstorm Studios, which has been absorbed by DC. The Brave and the Bold, which is a Bat family-centered movie following the relationship between Batman and his son Damian, who becomes Robin. Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, which is a sci-fi action film, and Swamp Thing, directed by James Mangold of Logan fame. On the TV side, several projects have been announced as well. Creature Commandos, which is a show written and created by James Gunn. The show will be the first official DCU project. However, Superman Legacy will officially introduce the world of the DCU. Waller will follow Amanda Waller after the events of Peacemaker and be the second spin-off of the Suicide Squad, with most of the cast of Peacemaker expected to return in some capacity to that show. This will drop before Superman Legacy and might explain more about the new universe to die-hard fans. He also got Lanterns, which will follow Jon Stewart and Hal Jordan in a buddy cop film taking place on Earth. This film may also include Guy Gardner, who is announced to be played by Nathan Fillion and is set up to appear in Superman. Booster Gold, which James Gunn and Peter Safran call an outright comedy, and may appear in the future on the Justice League roster, or a Blue Beetle project. Paradise Lost, which is an expansion of Patty Jenkins' idea of a Themyscira-centered show, and a second season of Peacemaker, which we'll touch on when we get to that show. Basically, James Gunn is the only man to ever rebound from being cancelled so hard he becomes the head of a major studio's production lot, which is kind of wild. Anyways, let's talk about the Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad loosely follows the events of the first movie, with Amanda Waller's Task Force X being refined to a science, with a large team and a task force being made up of miscellaneous supervillains, and not necessarily just the team from the first movie. Amanda sends 2 teams to Corto Maltese to destroy a lab and a prison where they are doing strange experiments on people, though the first team is betrayed by Blackguard, one of the members of the team, and the team is slaughtered with exception of Harley Quinn, who is captured by the Corto Maltese.
Waller, we're made. I'm the one who called you!
To be wed to their dictator, Silvio Luna, who she ultimately kills after seeing parallels between the crazed dictator and her ex-boyfriend, the Joker.
Talk about a workplace romance gone wrong.
Meanwhile, a team of villains led by Bloodsport successfully enter the island and quickly run into and slaughter a group of rebels the squad was meant to be aligned to. They met Rick Flag, who's appalled by what happened, but begrudgingly comes along to help them in their mission. The team eventually makes their way forward to the facility, but stop to save Harley, who was already escaping captivity herself. The squad makes it to the facility and discovers Starro, who gets out and starts possessing the people of Corto Maltese, and the squad is forced to kill Starro and save the planet again. While this is going on, Peacemaker confronts Rick Flag for wanting to leak his wrongdoing to the US government in relation to the Starro project and the Corto Maltese. Flag is killed by Peacemaker, and Peacemaker is seemingly killed when he's forced to do a blood sport. The team stops Starro, and the day is saved. The film does a really good job of fleshing out the threats in Corto Maltese, but the main villain Starro isn't characterized very much given the fact that he's, well, a giant starfish. The film instead puts its focus on creating a cast of characters that are complex and interesting, coming from the squad we ultimately follow throughout the film. Rick Flag returns in this film and seems to be kind of done with the whole spy and espionage bullshit, and also isn't a big fan of being continually forced to babysit incompetent teams of misfits. This arc eventually crescendos when Flag snaps and tries to leak the US involvement in Corto Maltese to the masses. Flag is sick of being a pawn throughout this movie, and he finally gets out of just being Waller's muscle and dies trying to do what was right. Harley Quinn is back in this film and kind of has the least development of all the main leads. She's on the squad that was slaughtered at the start of the film. Since the last Suicide Squad, it seems she's done a lot of missions as part of the Suicide Squad. She's definitely more unhinged and comical than she was in Birds of Prey. She has a date night with Luna, the dictator of Corto Maltese, but ultimately ends up killing him in a move that she figured would be best for her mental state.
When your taste in men is as bad as mine, they don't just go away quietly. They slash your tires and they kill your dogs.
Harley definitely feels reinterpreted script to script, which is a bit of odd whiplash when you're marathoning these films, but Margot Robbie's performance is pretty fun and not totally terrible like in the first film. I'm glad she ended up getting one last hurrah, and it's cool that she really understood Harley Quinn better by the time she did this film when compared to the 2016 Suicide Squad film. Bloodsport was blatantly the same character as Deadshot from the original movie. Again, being a super marksman and hired killer who's a single dad with a daughter he deeply loves.
First, I want out of here. Second, I want full custody of my daughter.
Next time you want to nick something, you take a partner, and they can be your lookout.
That's your advice.
Yeah.
Almost as an expansion to the Deadshot arc, Bloodsport has a teenage daughter who is notably probably around the same age of Deadshot's daughter, who is getting into trouble doing petty crimes. He's the pseudo-leader of the squad, helping keep the team together along with Rick Flag. Idris Elba plays the role well and is definitely played differently than Will Smith's Deadshot, which really is what sets the two apart. Bloodsport has a fierce rivalry with Peacemaker, who is very similar to Bloodsport in terms of power and skills.
Non-lethal. You lose.
Exploding compression bullets.
Peacemaker, for his part, is a blatant parody of Captain America in this film, being a hero who does heinous things he does in the name of peace in America, yet he's just a psycho with obvious low self-esteem and fragile masculinity. When he kills Flag at the end of the film, it's clear he did it to maintain peace, but also perhaps to get approval for finishing his mission. Peacemaker is a simple guy and a simple character. something the subsequent television show based on the character expands on, and further explains why he has such a lack of depth. Peacemaker is left seemingly killed at the end of this film after a duel with his rival Bloodsport, but then, in a post-credits scene, wakes up in the hospital. John Cena is brilliant in this. He looks just right, and I think he's in on the joke that only really someone like him could properly give off.
I cherish peace with all my heart. I don't care how many men, women, and children I need to kill to get it.
He also clearly works better as a goofy action star in these films, which made his casting pretty inspired in my opinion. King Shark doesn't have the deepest character, he's just kind of the goofy muscle, a la Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy, and much like the latter, who was played by Vin Diesel, has a big name behind the voice, with Sylvester Stallone voicing King Shark. He's a cute addition, but not necessarily too integral to the plot. Ratcatcher 2 is the second Ratcatcher, becoming a supervillain as a tribute to her late father, Ratcatcher. This is kind of the inverse of Polka Dot Man or Peacemaker, who were both forced into the role by their respective abusive parents. Ratcatcher was played by Thor director Taika Waititi, who had some cute cameos in the film. Ratcatcher 2 was played well by Daniela Melchior, and her relationship to her father, trying to make him proud by continuing his legacy, is kinda sweet throughout the film. Finally, we have Polka Dot Man, played by David Dashmelin, who has some PTSD brought on by the fact that his abusive mother was obsessed with giving him and his siblings superpowers, many of whom didn't survive. I like the inverse between him and Ratcatcher, and I also like the fact that James Gunn takes Polka Dot Man pretty seriously, with having some cute moments like when he pretends Starro is his mother and shoots him with a bunch of polka dots in rage. Polka Dot Man, when injuring Starro, remarks that he's a hero, and he, just for a moment, saw himself as a hero and not just a victim. But then he was crushed to death by Starro, fairly unceremoniously, prompting Ratcatcher to send rats at Starro, which changed Ratcatcher from a passive observer to a hero in her own right. I thought these were pretty good arcs for what could have been a couple of throwaway characters. Henry Braum did the cinematography for this film. He's been kind of James Gunn's go-to cinematographer for a while now, working on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and 3, this film, and of course the upcoming Superman film in 2025. Braum has worked in the industry for years, with his first credit in 1992, but recently his output has picked up a bit. Along with working with Gunn, he's also worked on The Flash with Andy Muschietti, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him working on Muschietti's upcoming Batman Brave and the Bold as well, since he seems to work well with James Gunn and his team, and has been working pretty frequently in the DC and Marvel universes quite a bit. His style is also really solid. He clearly got good with the camera, with a lot of nice camera moves and interesting shot composition. The color grading in this film I think also perfectly sets the vibe for Corto Maltese without being overbearing. It's not like the kind of Mexico is all yellow trope we see in a lot of films, but it kind of sets a vibe. Really great stuff on this film from Braum and the rest of the crew, who brought it to life visually. This film has two credited editors. Fred Raskin is perhaps the most interesting of the two leads. Fred Raskin is best known for being Quentin Tarantino's go-to editor following the death of his previous editor, Sally Menke, with Fred being her assistant for the Kill Bill films. He would also work with Gunn on his 3 Guardians films, this film, and the Peacemaker show, so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him in the upcoming Superman as well, though that hasn't been confirmed yet. And while he's worked with other directors like Eli Roth and Justin Lin on the Fast and Furious films, he mostly collaborates with Gunn and Tarantino. It actually makes a lot of sense since Tarantino and Gunn both like to run really bombastic, quick edits with lots of practical blood and gore. Christian Wagner, the other lead editor, has worked more broadly in Hollywood franchise pictures. The duo actually worked together on Fast and Furious in 2009, so clearly it's a good pairing since they've worked together before. Wagner was likely better for story and flow, while Raskin likely contributed a lot to more of the poppy, quick-paced editing. All speculation, but either way, the pair put together a very fun, well-edited film, with James Gunn's musical choices pretty well integrated as well. Musically, the film takes a lot of cues from James Gunn's other superhero projects, being scored primarily by licensed songs. Though in this film, Gunn used more contemporary songs than he did in Guardians, which was themed, based around Peter Quill's music player. This film doesn't have a plot device like that, but it still works since James Gunn's style and his mixtape of songs that kind of transcend genre and vibe still work well. We'll talk more about the soundtrack later in the full DCEU retrospective video, or if you're watching that, that's coming up eventually. But the soundtrack features older artists like Johnny Cash and Louis Prima, along with more contemporary artists like K-Flare the Decemberists. One thing I like is that there are really only a couple really famous tracks, with the most famous probably being Folsom Prison Blues by Johnny Cash. I complained about this when talking about Suicide Squad, the 2016 one I mean. I thought the songs were added with no rhyme or reason, and a lot of them didn't work. They were just famous tracks they paid for in hopes to sell the soundtrack for the film, which in total fairness did work. The soundtrack sold incredibly well. However, for the film itself, I found it a bit distracting and never really understood the musical thesis, where here, I see it pretty well. John Murphy scored the film, and I don't think there was anything musically memorable from a score perspective. I do think the musical is all around solid, but the emotional high points were scored by this veritable mixtape of tracks, with the actual scored tracks rarely getting to fill the emotional high points, which left that music being mostly ambient. It wasn't bad scores, like I think the famous Wonder Woman score is, but you know, nothing very memorable, sadly. I really like the tone of Suicide Squad. It's meant to be a sort of poppy version of a superhero film, which is sort of James Gunn's specialty, and why I think he was set to helm the DCEU moving forward. People love James Gunn and his work, and it shows in the box office of the 3 Guardians films as well. The film almost has a Quentin Tarantino feel, that may be in part due to the editing, but also in part because much like a lot of Tarantino films, it's bloody, goofy, and larger than life, while also maintaining a level of character study on a bunch of characters, with the plot progressing naturally and being well thought out, but being much more of background asset. Gunn's trauma history also plays a factor, with a lot of those movies being almost surrealist teenage angst goofy films, which I think pulls a bit over into here.
El sargento Kabuki machaca a los criminales.
Trauma is definitely a hit or miss, but I feel the ideologies put to the big screen is kind of fascinating, and James Gunn does it really well. Gunn is also one of the few people from that studio that really stood out and made it past Trauma, which is cool because I think Lloyd Kaufman's filmmaking style, especially a super refined version with a budget, deserves to make it to mainstream cinema, despite it being often goofy and childish. Characters like John Cena's Peacemaker are very openly comedic, but also have a character brewing beneath. Peacemaker, for example, has issues with his father. He doesn't know how to be his own man, and he's easily manipulated. This isn't a flat character designed to just spout out jokes. I think Deadpool's a key example of how not to do this type of character. He's goofy, doesn't care, and just spouts memes as he runs through standard Marvel stories. Well, that's good for some people, and I don't hate the Deadpool films 100%. This film continuously adds more depths to the characters while also being pretty funny. When Rick Flag is dying and says,
Peacemaker. What a joke.
you can tell that dug deep on the character of Peacemaker. The same line would subsequently, of course, haunt Peacemaker in his solo show. Things like this aren't really added to the Deadpool movies. Deadpool might be momentarily bothered, but then it'll quickly be washed away by a bunch of memes. Peacemaker's a goofball, kind of a loser, and he's funny. But you can tell something like Peacemaker What a Joke, as Rick Flag was dying, really hit him deep, and added some interesting self-conflict within the story of his wider TV show that we'll get to shortly. Alright, let's talk about some characters and where they're adapted from. Bloodsport in this film fills in for Deadshot, who was in a lot of the early drafts of the film. The villain initially appeared in Superman Volume 2 Number 4 from 1987 in the comics. He was a bloodthirsty psychopath and marksman who attempts to kill Superman after being hired by Lex Luthor, and he's obsessed with the Vietnam War, and almost seems like a bit of a play on a character like Sylvester Stallone's Rambo. In the film, he's portrayed somewhat similarly, except he's a bit more level-headed, though references were made to him attempting to assassinate Superman with a kryptonite bullet and things like that. The plotline about his daughter seems like a bit of a carryover from the script and was intended to feature Will Smith's Deadshot originally, but obviously that changed when Will Smith was unable to return. Peacemaker was created in 1966 in the Charleston comic book Fighting 5 number 40. His character was the direct inspiration for the comedian in Alan Moore's Watchmen, back when he intended the book to be based on the characters of Charleston comics after DC absorbed Charleston. The original Charleston version was a peaceful pacifist, but over time became a violent ultra-patriot, which is what James Gunn moved forward with this film. King Shark was created in 1994 as a one-off Superboy villain for Superboy issue 0, which was a tie-in to DC's 1994 event Zero Hour, which acted as an incredibly soft reboot and continuity cleaning event, mostly intended to button up all those possible future issues of the past that got very confusing at times. King Shark would go on to cross over with Aquaman a few times, but primarily served as part of the Suicide Squad or Secret Six. Polka Dot Man was a long-term joke among comic fans and people with a passing interest in comics. Not to be confused with the Polka Dot Bandit, a one-off Green Arrow villain. Polka Dot Man is an obscure Batman villain who first appeared in Detective Comics 300 from 1962 and was the cover villain of that issue. This was a campy era for Batman, and the era went on to inspire the 1960s Adam West show before Carmen Infantino and Denny O'Neil would separately create runs modernizing the character. The character was created by Bill Finger, the co-creator of Batman, about 25 years into his run on the character, so naturally the fresh ideas were flowing, and his character may be a little too fresh. Essentially in the comics he can make objects out of his polka dots, whereas in the film it mostly just acts as a projectile weapon. Ratcatcher is a character that appears in flashbacks during this film, and Ratcatcher 2 is his daughter, who also appears in the primary cast. Ratcatcher first appeared in Detective Comics 585 and is another Batman villain that's a bit of a laughing stock. Ratcatcher 2 is a new character and hadn't had a comic book counterpart before since the film came out. The Thinker is a Flash villain that initially fought the Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick, premiering in 1943's All Flash number 12, before eventually becoming a villain of the later Flash, as well, occasionally Batman. Savant was a character that started as part of Jim Lee's comic line Wildstorm before being folded into the DC universe after Jim Lee sold the company to DC in 1999 following the Shattered Image event, which removed them from the shared Image continuity. Angelina of Spawn also switched from Image to Marvel, so it isn't unheard of for Image characters to continuity hop. The first version of the character premiered in Wildcats 11 in 1994, before DC's version came out in 2003's Birds of Prey number 56, who was a vigilante in Gotham that didn't play by the rules. While the film version was based more on the 2003 version, taking the name and attitude of that character and goggles worn from the original Wildstorm version, so it can be assumed to be a loose amalgamation of both visually. Blackguard first appeared in Booster Gold number 1 from 1986 and was a recurring villain of Booster Gold. He's a huge ripped guy with a 5-foot long ponytail that can create energy constructs. Pete Davidson's interpretation of the character seems to borrow little from the original, bar the name. The Detachable Limb Kid is an original character based on the creatively named Arm Fall Off Boy. Arm Fall Off Boy is a character that was part of the Legion of Superheroes, who was created in 1989's Secret Origin Volume 2 number 46, and he was a gag character even in his original comic appearance. He's based in the very real reality that the Legion of Superheroes, while iconic, is a group of superheroes with some of the dumbest names to ever grace the page. Weasel is a Firestorm villain who originally appeared in Firestorm Volume 2 number 36 from 1985. He appeared a few times throughout the years before being killed on a mission with the Suicide Squad, similarly to what happened to him in this film. However, it's been revealed that the character survived and will be starring as part of the Creature Commandos next year. Calendar Man appears in this film briefly and is based on Batman creator Bill Finger's character, who originally appeared in Detective Comics 259, who started off as a gimmick character who created traps based on the seasons, before becoming something of an important character due to the seminal series Batman The Long Halloween, which he was a major character of. Javelin is a Green Lantern villain originating in Green Lantern Volume 2, number 173 from 1984. Due to his overwhelmingly yellow appearance and yellow javelin, he was a fair match for Green Lantern in that particular issue. He is honestly a ridiculous character and a great pick for a one-off character to put on the squad, especially given his ridiculous look when divorced from the idea that Green Lantern is weak against the color yellow. Mongol first appeared in Showcase 95 number 8 from 1995. She is the twin sister of Mongol, who is a seminal Superman and Green Lantern villain. She was never met with much fanfare in the comics and was eventually unceremoniously killed by her twin brother in the comics. Double Down. Why am I talking about a character that appeared for seconds in the film? Because I'm a weird person. Double Down first appeared in Flash, Iron Heights number 1 from 2001, and gained his powers when he fused to a deck of cards. He's appeared taunting Calendar Man in the film. Kaleidoscope is an obscure villain who's an enemy of Christopher King, who wielded the H-Dial at one point. She first appeared in Superboy Volume 2, number 36. At that time, Dial H for Hero was the backup feature. You may be asking, what the hell is an H-Dial? Well, I'll tell you. The H-Dial is a dial that was originally owned by child Robert Reed, who can use the dial to select a superhero to transform into. He has numerous forms and powers he can use for different situations, including just randomly turning into some DC heroes and villains. The character inspired the Cartoon Network show Ben 10, which is literally the exact same concept. The creator of Ben 10 has claimed in an obscure 2009 blog post that it was not inspired by the DC character, but I refuse to believe that, as the characters are too similar for that to be the case. This is a very specific and odd power set. Both were owned by Warner Brothers back when the show was created, but I don't know. Kind of interesting either way. Starro is the main villain of the Suicide Squad and was the first villain that the Justice League fought, first appearing in The Brave and the Bold, number 28. In the very same issue the Justice League first appeared in. Like the film, in the comics, he can summon Starro spores, which can take over people's minds and make them minions of Starro. There are two end credit scenes that attempt to foreshadow things to come. In the first end credit scene, it's revealed Weasel, a character that is unceremoniously drowned when the first squad died at the start of the film.
Did anyone check on where the Weasel could swim?
Had actually survived drowning and woke up on the beach where the first battle took place. While Weasel never reappeared in the DCEU, he will eventually be folded into the first project of the DCU, Creature Commandos. As far as I understand, Creature Commandos won't be adding much to the lore switch between the DCEU and DCU, so it is yet to be seen if this is a new version of the Weasel, an alternate version of the Weasel, or some sort of dimension hopping thing. Who knows, whatever. Regardless, the scene was more of a gag than anything. The second post-credit scene would foreshadow the DCEU's next project and next expansion to this film, Peacemaker, which shows that Peacemaker did in fact survive his bout against Idris Elba's Bloodsport and is in the hospital recovering, being visited by Harcourt, who, while holding a minor role in this film, was set to be a more major player in the upcoming Peacemaker HBO Max show. I think this film is funny front to back and is paced very well with amazing characterizations. This film intentionally chooses to pay homage to B and C list characters of the DC universe and adds a level of thought and depth they never really got in the comics as goofy villains of the week. And while I think Peacemaker definitely had some good stuff, having a few runs throughout the years and being the inspiration for the Watchmen's comedian, they're all unique pulls from throughout the depths of the DC universe. Starro was a great choice for the villain as well. He was the Justice League's first villain, and one that was going to be hard to utilize in DC's more serious take on the Justice League. Plus, it gave us some kaiju action in the DCEU, and I love kaijus. Plus, Harley Quinn takes more of a back seat to the rest of these characters, which I think is kind of nice. I assume it may have been due to scheduling conflicts, as Margot Robbie has grown to be a top Hollywood star, especially in the last few years, but Harley Quinn isn't in a lot of the film, and I think that's good. Really allows Bloodsport, Rick Flag, and Peacemaker to shine along with the sub-leads, as I think Harley easily could have hijacked this film. I think she's great in the film, and I'm glad she's in the cast, but if we look at something like Birds of Prey, which we talked about earlier, she really took over the film and made it so the actual Birds of Prey were kicked to the background of their own film, which seemed kinda odd. Here, Harley doesn't overpower the new characters, but has her own cute subplots, and works a bit with the team later on. I thought this made these characters more memorable than, say, Huntress or Black Canary from Birds of Prey, which really fell to the background of Harley Quinn. The action is really fun and creative. I don't think this has ever been a huge problem for the DCEU, except the more CGI-heavy battles, which sometimes felt snore-worthy. But the CGI Starro and the lighting actually looks surprisingly really decent, so good job to the effects team on this, but I guess they had a lot less effects that they had to do when compared to other films. Well, honestly, I love the Suicide Squad, and it's probably my favorite superhero film in any cinematic universe. Its pace is amazing, the action is fun, and the humor is funny constantly, at least to me. And I never felt like it got in the way of creating strong characters. To me, this is the pinnacle of superhero filmmaking. I really enjoy it. And Peacemaker, which we're talking about next, also adds a lot to the film. I can see why they gave James Gunn the pilot seat to the DC universe. He's probably the most consistently strong superhero director in the cinematic universe age. I'm interested to see what he does with Superman. I love the character, but one core problem is that he's so optimistic. General audiences have trouble relating to him. With Guardians, and with this film, James Gunn had the power to play around a bit with the characters, due to the fact that those characters are all a little more low-key and Marvel and DC didn't mind some changes. Superman is going to be a much finer line to tread. How is James Gunn going to maintain the spirit of the original while still expanding him and making him relatable to a modern audience? I'm not sure, and I'm hoping for the best for James Gunn, and I hope the film really works. So, I'm cautiously optimistic, but anyways, I think I'm interested in seeing James Gunn's take, because he's been pretty consistent so far. The Suicide Squad costed $185 million to make, but only brought in $169 million. This was the last of the COVID movies in the DCEU, but it definitely didn't make much money in theaters. However, it also went to HBO Max day and date for a 1-month streaming window, which was standard in 2021, and according to data from Samba TV, it had the highest HBO Max viewership of any day one DC release on HBO Max, based on a data set pulled from the smart TVs at 2.8 million against Wonder Woman 84's 2.2 million and Zack Snyder's Justice League's 1.8 million. However, it was behind Mortal Kombat's 3.8 million. These numbers are not definitive data. It only pulls from smart TVs or devices like Roku or Apple TV. Regardless, by some metric, it must have done well, as it went on to create the spin-off show Peacemaker, as well as giving Gunn the keys to the DC universe moving forward. Critically, it was pretty acclaimed, getting 90% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 72 out of 100 on Metacritic. People praised the humor and diversion from the more stone-cold badass heroes that DC's used to having, seeing Gunn's ultra-violent attempt at the genre as a breath of fresh air. Some critics said the film dragged a bit and didn't like the satirical nature of the film, but for the most part it was pretty well received.